Before we begin, if this is your first time here, welcome to Still Missing. We dig into the world's most haunting unsolved cases. New episodes every Monday and Thursday. Subscribe so you don't miss a single case. On Christmas Eve, 1945, a fire broke out at the Sodder family home in Fayetteville, West Virginia. George and Jennie Sodder and 4 of their 9 children managed to escape the burning house. But 5 of their children, Morris, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty, ranging in age from 5 to 14, were trapped upstairs. Or at least, that's what everyone assumed. When the fire was finally extinguished and investigators searched the ashes, they expected to find 5 sets of remains. They found nothing. No bones. No teeth. No fragments. Nothing at all. A house fire hot enough to kill 5 children should have left skeletal remains. Cremation requires sustained temperatures of over 1600 degrees Fahrenheit, far beyond what a typical house fire can produce. Yet the fire department declared all 5 children dead. The case was closed. George and Jennie Sodder refused to accept it. They believed their children had not died in the fire. They believed their children had been taken. And they spent the rest of their lives trying to prove it. The Sodder family was of Italian descent. George Sodder, born Giorgio Soddo in Sardinia, had immigrated to the United States as a young man and built a successful coal hauling business in West Virginia. He and his wife Jennie had 10 children in total, though one had died in infancy, leaving 9. They were a large, close-knit, well-known family in the small town of Fayetteville. But George Sodder was also outspoken. In the months before the fire, he had publicly criticized Benito Mussolini's fascist government in Italy. This angered some members of the local Italian-American community who still supported Mussolini. According to Jennie Sodder, a stranger had come to the house one evening and threatened George, telling him that his house would go up in smoke and that his children would be destroyed. George dismissed it at the time. He would later wish he hadn't.
On the night of December 24, 1945, the family went to bed as usual. Jennie Sodder stayed up late, eventually falling asleep on the living room couch. Around 1 in the morning, she was awakened by a loud bang on the roof, which she initially dismissed as a noise from a coal truck on the nearby road. Shortly after, the phone rang. Jennie answered, but the caller was a woman she didn't recognize, asking for someone who didn't live there. Jennie hung up and noticed that the lights were still on and the curtains were still open in the living room. Unusual for that time of night. She went back to sleep. Sometime around 1:30 in the morning, Jennie woke again, this time to the smell of smoke. The downstairs was on fire. She screamed for the children. George rushed to help. 4 of the children who slept downstairs made it out safely. But the 5 who slept upstairs, Morris, age 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jennie, 8, and Betty, 5, could not be reached. The staircase was already engulfed in flames. George tried to get to the 2nd floor from the outside. He ran to get a ladder that he normally kept leaning against the side of the house. It was gone. It was later found lying in a ditch 75 feet from the house. He tried to use a large barrel to climb up and reach the 2nd floor windows. But the barrel, which had been full of water just days before, was empty. He tried to start his coal truck to drive it close to the house and climb onto the roof from the truck bed. Neither of his 2 trucks would start, despite both having worked perfectly the day before. Every possible means of rescue had been sabotaged or rendered useless. George called the fire department. In a town as small as Fayetteville, the fire station was only about 2 miles away. But the fire department did not arrive until nearly 8 o'clock in the morning, almost 7 hours after the call. By then, the house had burned to the ground. The chief of the fire department, F.J. Morris, conducted a brief search of the ashes and declared that the 5 missing children had died in the fire. No remains were recovered, but Morris attributed this to the intensity of the fire. The death certificates were signed, the case was closed. George and Jennie launched a public campaign to find their children. They erected a massive billboard along Route 16, the main highway near Fayetteville. The billboard displayed photos of the 5 missing children and offered a reward for information, eventually increasing it to $10,000, a significant sum at the time. The billboard stood for decades, becoming one of the most recognized landmarks in the area. They hired multiple private investigators over the years. Most turned up nothing. One investigator they hired simply disappeared with their money. They wrote letters to the FBI, to state officials, to anyone they thought might help. They received very little assistance. Then, in 1967, more than 20 years after the fire, Jennie Sodder received a photograph in the mail. It was sent in an envelope postmarked from Kentucky, with no return address. The photograph showed a young man in his mid-20s. On the back of the photo, someone had written, "Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. IO boys. In 9013235. The handwriting was unfamiliar. The message was cryptic. But Jennie was convinced the man in the photograph was her son Louis, who would have been approximately the right age at the time. She hired another private investigator to trace the origin of the photograph. He traveled to Kentucky, checked into a hotel, and was never heard from again. The photograph was never explained. George Sodder died in 1969, still believing his children were alive. Jennie continued the search alone. She kept the billboard standing until her own death in 1989. The billboard was finally taken down after she passed. No trace of the 5 Sodder children has ever been found. No remains. No positive identification. No confirmed sighting. The case remains officially unsolved. In the decades since, amateur investigators and true crime researchers have continued to examine the case. Some believe the children were kidnapped as part of a vendetta against George Sodder, possibly connected to his outspoken criticism of Mussolini, or to a dispute with local criminal elements. Others believe the children were taken by a child trafficking ring that operated in rural Appalachia during the 1940s. A smaller number believe the children did die in the fire, and that the lack of remains can be explained by the collapse of the house into the basement, where the ashes were later covered before a thorough search could be conducted. But George and Jennie Sodder did not believe it, and as they began to investigate on their own, the official story fell apart piece by piece. First, the fire. A local telephone repairman discovered that the house's phone line had been cut, not burned, but deliberately severed before the fire started. This suggested that someone had tampered with the lines before the blaze. The coal truck engines had also been tampered with. A mechanic later found that critical ignition components had been removed from both trucks. The missing ladder, the empty water barrel, the cut phone line, the disabled trucks. These were not coincidences. Someone had prepared the scene. Second, the absence of remains. George hired a private investigator and consulted with experts. A professor of pathology told him that a normal house fire cannot reach temperatures sufficient to completely incinerate a human body, especially the bones and teeth of 5 children. Even in the worst house fires, skeletal fragments almost always survive. The complete absence of any remains was, in the expert's opinion, evidence that the children were not in the house when it burned. George also discovered that the fire chief F.J. Morris had a questionable connection to the case. Morris had been one of the people who initially told the coroner that the children had died in the fire, despite recovering zero physical evidence to support that conclusion. Years later, Morris would change his story, but by then the original ashes had been bulldozed and buried, making any further forensic examination impossible. Third, witnesses came forward. A woman at a hotel in a nearby town reported seeing the 5 Sodder children in the company of 2 adults, a man and a woman she didn't recognize. On the morning after the fire, she said the children looked nervous and frightened. A woman working at a tourist stop along a major highway reported a similar sighting around the same time. Another witness claimed to have seen the children in the back of a vehicle heading south on the night of the fire. None of these sightings were ever followed up by police. But the evidence of sabotage, the cut phone line, the disabled trucks, the missing ladder, the empty water barrel, is difficult to dismiss. Someone planned this, whether the goal was murder or kidnapping. Someone went to the Sodder house on Christmas Eve, 1945, and made sure that no one could stop what was about to happen. 5 children went to sleep in their beds that night. By morning, they were gone. Their parents spent 44 years searching. Their mother kept a billboard standing on the highway for nearly half a century, staring out at every passing car, hoping one of them would bring her children home. None of them ever did. The Sodder children remain among the most haunting missing persons cases in American history. 5 children vanish without a single trace. If you have any information about this case, the West Virginia State Police continue to maintain an open file on the Sodder children. Next episode, Australia. 1948. The well-dressed man is found dead on the beach. No ID. No cause of death. And in his pocket, a scrap of paper torn from one of the rarest books in the world, with a phrase that translates to, "It is finished." The Tamum Shud case. Don't miss it. I want to hear from you. Do you think the 5 Sodder children died in the fire? Or were they taken? And if they were taken, by whom and why? Drop your wildest theory in the comments. If this story made you want answers, you're in the right place. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The next one drops Thursday. This is Still Missing. Some cases never close.